Alright, yo, so I'm gonna be going dumpster diving again. I got the trailer already filled up with some stuff. I got some of this in a previous video, and then others I've just been collecting as we go, and then I just put it all in the trailer. So I'm gonna get in here, and I'm probably not gonna talk too much in real time. I'm gonna do a voiceover, I think, and I'm gonna give you guys some tips and tricks on how to make boatloads of money scrapping metal. So yeah, let's get into it, man. Alright, yo, so I don't know how well this video is going to come out. It's the first time I've ever tried something like this, where I kind of just do what I do on camera, and then I'm doing a voiceover right now. So I actually wrote down a bunch of notes with different advice here. So I'm going to try to work it into this video. It doesn't really go along with the background of the video, like what's happening. I wanted to kind of give advice without having you guys look at just me standing there next to a table or something. So there's stuff going on in the background, and then I'm going to be talking about something different here. So yeah, let me know in the comments how this video is going to work out, because I'm not really sure. So the first thing that I have, the first advice I have for you, if you're trying to get started in scrap metal and become pretty successful, learn your area and the areas around you. And what I mean by that is, learn how to get around without GPS. Learn like the different construction projects going on in your area. Try to learn like the garbage routes. Like, you don't have to know the last name of every scrapper out there in your area, but try to learn your area and like what's going on. Become situationally aware of things. It's gonna really help you out. You don't have to be like a super expert in it either. You just, like being able to find your way around without having to plug in an address on your phone. It's gonna help you out significantly. There's a lot of times where I'm driving around, I don't really know where I'm at, but I know areas, like I know some of the main roads around me, so I can't really get lost. That helps out a lot. It also helps you to see different things and, be able to keep up on just being able to be out there, out and about, and seeing different dumpsters and stuff. Alright, and then the second piece of advice I have for you is develop routes. That kind of piggybacks off of learning your area. If you're out like doing curbside stuff, or even if you're out dumpster diving, you want to kind of, this is also going to play into some advice I have later on down the line, but you want to be able to start developing routes. I have a couple different routes. You can get a couple different routes, for various different reasons, for various different activities. But you want to try to eliminate just driving around aimlessly. In the video that you're watching now, I'm gonna have one of my curbside routes in here, and you know, so you can have curbside routes, you can have dumpster routes, you can have routes for like just normal pickups and stuff. Those are harder to plan, you know. Doing like the Facebook marketplace thing or getting stuff free off Craigslist, it's going to be harder to get routes with that, because sometimes you got to be there at, like, the quickest one gets the metal, you know. But you know, for doing dumpster diving and curbside stuff, you want to get routes. That's going to eliminate a lot of your expenses, because fuel will be your number one expense, like gasoline and diesel fuel and whatnot. Just traveling around aimlessly, you're going to have a lot of extra fuel expense. So, you know, you want to develop routes. They don't have to be anywhere close to where you live either. But, you know, you want to have a purpose. When I was younger, you know, like when you're just starting out, it's harder to have a route, especially if you don't know the area. But the more you know the area, the more you can develop a route. And then, you know, once you expand your knowledge of your area to other areas around you, you can get even more and more routes. Like when I started out, you know, I never really left the township I lived in. And then the more I got into it, I started going to other areas of the school district. And then the older I got, you know, the more I expanded. And then before long, I was doing like the whole Lehigh Valley. You know, I wasn't hitting up every dumpster every night, but, you know, I knew generally where I could go on what day or whatever, and I could consolidate a bunch of different dumpsters into one night. And, you know, now I'm in Ohio, you know. The area I'm in is a small town, you know. You're not going to find too much in the town that I live in. So a lot of my routes now, you know, I'm going from Columbus up to Perrysburg sometimes. So, you know, my Columbus routes, I mean, I got like 15 different routes now that I can go on. Maybe even more than that. And I'm finding new ones. So, you know, like I said, develop routes and learn your area. That's going to really help you out. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is, you know, you got to be adaptable in this business. The scrap metal world is forever changing, you know. Not only the way people discard things, but the materials that manufacturers need to build things. It's forever changing. Prices are forever changing. Laws and regulations are changing. You know, you have to adapt to the environment around you and the way scrap metal is going. Otherwise, you will not be able to succeed. When I first started the scrap metal adventures, you know, it was before YouTube. I had to pretty much teach myself how to do everything. But I would go in the woods and dig cars out of the woods. And then, you know, when we got kind of done with that, I started going around what, as some people would say, curb shopping. You know, going around on trash day, picking up metal before the trash people came. There was so many other people doing it at the time, you know. It was actually a really good way to make money. Scrap metal was up and everything, you know. But then, a couple years later, the township changed the garbage contract, and now they have like these 96-gallon mini dumpsters, and you're not allowed to set anything outside of them. So, you know, that pretty much took away the whole system I had of doing that. Because now there's nothing next to the trash cans anymore. You know, the metal that you do find in the trash cans is not very big. You know, like knock handles and some random miscellaneous auto parts and stuff like that. So, you know, I had to change it up a little bit, you know. I mean, I've always been dumpster diving too, but now if I wanted to succeed in the area that I'm originally from, you know, I would have to do something besides what I was doing when I started. You know, them guys that get stuck in their ways and all they ever knew was curb shopping, you know, they failed after those regulations changed or whatever, or the garbage routes changed. So, you know, if you really want to succeed in the scrap metal industry, be adaptable. You know, another way that things have changed for me is I used to do a lot of steel and aluminum, and now you see I'm finding crap tons of copper. So, you know, you got to be able to adapt to what's coming at you, and also the expectations of your buyers and stuff, because that'll change as well. You know, you'll go to the yard one day and all of a sudden what you used to be able to get away with, especially with like possibly dirty aluminum and stuff, it used to be clean. All of a sudden, oh man, they're making you either going to go with dirty aluminum or, you know, they're not taking it. That'll happen as well, depending on, you know, different market factors out there. You know, different commodities are in higher or lesser demands, depending on a whole bunch of different factors out there. So, you know, if you're starting right now scrap metal prices are kind of up. You know, if you're trying to stay in this long term, you know, scrap metal prices are gonna fall again, and you have to be ready for that. You know, those of us that have made it through a time where scrap metal was down a whole heck of a lot, you know, we know what we're talking about. Those of you that started when scrap metal was up, if when that happens, you know, you might find yourself struggling if you're dependent on that money that you're getting right now. So, you know, you're going to have to adapt to that. There's more I could add to this list, but you know, just as a general term, just, you know, be adaptable. Don't get stuck in your ways. Don't get complacent in this business, because it can change drastically at the blink of an eye. Alright, the next thing I want to say is, if you want to be successful in scrap metal, you need to be persistent, you know. Don't give up. There's some days you're going to go out, you're going to hit your routes, and you're not going to find nothing. You know, you're going to be going down, you've done 75% of your route, and, you know, you might have a metal hole and maybe an extension cord off of a vacuum, and that's all you got. You know, you come around the corner, and then bam, all mayhem breaks loose. You know, you're finding things left and right, and you don't even know what to do with yourself anymore. But if you would have given up after the first half of your route, you would have not ever found any of that stuff. You know, you can't control what people throw out. You can't control what other people pick up. But what you can control is your ability to fight through adversity. It's a really hard thing to, it's really hard to, I can't think of a word for it. Like when you're in the moment, it can be hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It can be hard to keep pushing on, but at the end of the day, that's what you got to do. Don't take a challenge if something's challenging, some people will just quit. You're not going to be successful if that's your way of looking at things. Like, if you're out there and you're not finding anything and you're like, oh, this is a sign from the universe that I need to give up right now. No. That is, what that is, a sign from, yourself that, you just need to push a little bit harder. And some people can't get over that mountain, So what they do is they just give up and go home, and, they can miss out on a couple $1,000 because, they just gave up on what they were doing. That plays a part in life, not just scrap metal. But, you need to be persistent. You'll notice that in this video, as we get further into the video, it starts to snow. And, I was driving, I think like 40 miles away. No, it was only 30 miles. I knew I was driving 30 miles away, and it was dark, it was snowy. I was like, man, I'm never going to find anything today. Why am I even doing this? I had that intrusive thought, like everybody has them, It's a part of human nature. You're going to have them intrusive thoughts telling you, oh, I need to stop this. There's no point in doing this. I might as well just give up now. I kind of fought through that in this video. Like, I fought through it. I said, you know what? It can be snowy. I'm still going to go down, and I'm going to make this a good day. I'm going to find stuff. It doesn't matter how much harder it's going to be. I'm going to do it. And I did. I went down there, and I was finding so much crap. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, you'll see it. But most people would not have done that. They would have just gone home. And, so that's the one thing I was trying to say, is just be persistent. And even if you're not the best at something, just that persistency and that drive to not give up, that's going to make you far better than a lot of your competitors out there. And like I said, that's not just scrap metal, it's dang near everything in life. When I was riding motocross, I was not naturally gifted at that. I would have to hit a jump 1,000 times before I, truly learned how to do it. Whereas some people, the first time they ever got on a dirt bike, they hit the same jump and, they went like 10 feet further than me or whatever. Whereas me, I had to hit it 1,000 different times before I finally understood, how I need to get on the throttle and position my weight and everything to actually make it a successful jump. And, a even though I didn't get things right away, I was so persistent, I was hitting the same, I'd ride around the track 100 times, whereas some of my friends, they'd ride like 1 or 2 laps and then go sit down and bullshit, but it's, then later on is, I did that more and more and more, I actually ended up being better than most of those guys because of how persistent I was, and I never gave up. You have to be that way with scrap metal sometimes too, and like I said, yeah, there's some days that suck, some days are slow and you won't find nothing, but just keep doing it and eventually it's going to work out for you. Alright, so the next thing is, you need to get stronger and you need to get smarter than the other guys out there. There's a lot of people doing scrap metal out there. There's a lot of tweakers just looking to get money for their next fix. There's a lot of other guys out there like me that, we pretty much know what we're doing. This is what we do. You gotta learn how to do scrap metal successfully in order to be successful at scrap metal. Like, it sounds simple, but a lot of people don't understand that. They might watch some of these other dudes that have been doing it for years, and they just pick up on the ways that other people do things just because that's the way it's been done. And I don't like that mentality. You see a lot of the videos I do where I'll strip wire and then I'll do the math that relates to it. I like to try to think about things myself. The system I have, like the truck that I have, the truck isn't exactly the perfect solution for scrap metal, but the tree, we'll take another example, the tree service. This vehicle you see that I'm throwing scrap metal into, that's my tree service rig too. A lot of people in trees, they get like these F550s with the chipper and or maybe like an F750 bucket truck with a chip body on it, and that's how they go about their business. The way I'm set up in the tree business is completely different than other people, and that gives me the advantage because I can go into tighter areas than a lot of these guys with my lift. I can chip into the truck, or I can chip into the trailer, or I have this big open top trailer. I can throw brush in there if I need to and not even have to bring the chipper sometimes. And then I can also hook my lift up to like a tractor and tow it into an area that you can't even get a pickup truck into. So like, I didn't let other people's tree services affect the way I set up my tree service. I figured out what would work for me, and then I just kind of rolled with it. And then in order to be successful in scrap metal, you have to be the same way. The same sort of mentality is going to work for you. Like, just because you see me doing something with scrap metal, just because you see Mike the Scavenger or Scrap and Pallet Man doing something on YouTube, don't think that, you have to do things exactly how we do them. Okay, yeah, maybe you can take our advice or some of the things that we do and incorporate it into what you're doing. But, think about it yourself, I guess. Like use your own brain to evaluate whether it's going to work for you in your situation. Like a lot of the wire stripping videos I do, just because you can only make $1 an hour doing some of it doesn't mean it's not going to work for you. Maybe you have a different way of doing things, but I always tell people at the end of those videos, I'm not going to try to influence how you do things, but for me it's not worth it. But you need to evaluate it for yourself. Some people some people can't handle the stuff that I'm doing, whereas they're going to be more inclined to do like computer type stuff, or taking apart small frivolous things that I wouldn't otherwise bother myself with. So don't trying to think of how to put it. Like you need to get smarter than just your average random other dude. Learn how to think yourself. Learn how to think for yourself. Develop your own systems, and learn from others, but don't think you have to copy others, I guess is what I'm getting at there. And so that's the mental side of it. The physical side is, a lot of this stuff is really heavy and bulky, and either you're going to get stronger or you're going to fail. Or if you don't get stronger, you have to use your smarts to figure out another way to do stuff. You have the choice, either get smart or get strong. Preferably do both at the same time, but if you far exceed in one versus the other, that'll also help you. I've seen a dude with one arm lift up V8 engine blocks, so don't think because you have a handicap either that getting strong is not your thing. You can still get strong with severe physical handicaps. Don't limit yourself because of that. Alright, so the next thing I can say that will help to make you successful with scrap metal is learn how to take things apart and carry the tools that you need to take those things apart with you. You don't have to carry a full service truck with you, but being able to, say, take apart or take a tabletop off of a metal frame, that's going to help you out. Being able to take recliner frames out of the recliners, that's going to, one, eliminate the guessing work at the yard. If you show up with a recliner still attached to the recliner frame, they're going to have to guess, oh, how much does the wood weigh? Oh, I don't know, like 30 pounds, and it might only weigh 10. So you're getting massive deductions for, having all this trash and debris. And then also, if you don't take those recliner frames off, you have to haul all that trash and debris, and that takes away space that you could have been hauling other valuable metals. So also, with that, you need to be able to take things apart on the road. Sometimes things are more valuable, and like how my setup is, I have this trailer. Usually I'll throw the light iron into the trailer, and then the non-ferrous goes into the truck bed. Sometimes I might throw something on the trailer thinking I'm going to take it apart, and then 10 seconds later it's completely buried because I found other stuff. And then by the time I remember there's something valuable under there, it's too late and I'm not getting it. So, having the tools you need to take certain things apart, that's going to help you not only get more metal, but it's also going to help you, organize your load better, and be able to separate things the way you need to separate things. There's other reasons why you need to carry tools with you. You might have breakdowns and stuff. Learning how to fix your truck is also going to help you. But, we're not going to get into all that yet. But, having certain tools with you to take things apart, it's gonna go a long way. I think there was a video last year I did where, there was a metal pipe that was sitting under about, 20,000 pounds of concrete. There's no way I'm getting that metal pipe out by hand. So I had a Sawzall cut it where I could. It was still a pretty good chunk of steel. And then, I had to leave the rest of it. But I was able to get some versus getting none because I had that Sawzall with me. I'll have another video about the tools that I think you should have on your scrap metal dumpster diving rig. But yeah. Another thing I do want to add about this part is, it's okay to have some tools on your truck and then have other tools for like a higher level of breaking things down in your shop or garage or whatever, or in your shed or backyard or wherever you're breaking things down. You don't have to carry the tools with you to cut apart a steel unit. Unless you do have a massive service rig already. But you don't need every shop tool on your truck. You need some tools to just be able to break things down and take things apart on the road. And then certain things you will break down at your place, I guess, or wherever you're breaking things down. I know there for a minute, when I was in the Army, I'd have to do things in the barracks parking lot. So, not everybody has a garage or something to break things down in, but, having tools to take things apart on your truck and then having things in your shop is going to help you significantly. Alright, so the next thing is, we were talking about taking things apart. The next thing that's going to help you big time in the scrap metal world is learn what things are not worth taking apart. I've talked about this a little bit in some of my comments with people, but we'll get into it here, right? So I've worked at a couple different scrap yards, and then I've also done a whole bunch of breaking things down apart myself, because I do a whole bunch of dumpster diving and scrap metal stuff myself. But I've seen people at the yards when they come in, they have like small engines and stuff. There's aluminum in small engines, for those of you that don't know. And clean aluminum pays, I think, it was like 40 cents a pound at the time. This is back in 2018. The clean cast aluminum, I think it paid like 40 or 45 cents a pound or something. Whereas the dirty aluminum, like if it had steel and stuff in it, we were paying 15 cents a pound, which is still pretty good for dirty aluminum. But I've seen dudes, they'll get like a small engine, they'll spend an hour or two getting all the steel off this small aluminum part. They'll pull all the piston rings, they'll get all the snap rings out of everything, all the nuts and bolts, and they'll go over the top to get clean aluminum price for some small little casting that came on their lawnmower or their weed whacker or something. And when I was running the scale, I would ask people, like, hey, like, I would do it in a judgment-free way, but I would ask them, I was like, hey, like, how long did it take you to get all this aluminum cleaned up? And they're like, oh, it wasn't long, it was only like an hour or two or something ridiculous. And I'm like, oh, all right, but that's cool, And then I would throw it on the scale. They'd have 3 pounds of clean aluminum, but they're telling me it took them 2 hours to clean it up. And it's like, alright, like, even if it took you an hour, you're getting, what, like, the difference between 45 cents and 15 cents is 30 cents. You had 3 pounds of aluminum. With all the steel and stuff on it, you might have had 4 pounds of dirty aluminum. So you're getting paid less than $1 an hour to clean up this aluminum. But, they don't, like, some people cannot grasp that concept. They just see, 45 cents clean, 15 cents dirty, and they're going to clean it. They're going to spend so much time doing something that pays them so little. Whereas, they could have been out in the dumpsters or in the streets getting more scrap metal, and came across that dumpster that I saw a couple weeks ago where I found $900 in the one dumpster. Or, I don't know, I didn't actually watch the Mike the Scavenger video where he just posted he found like $4,000 of cat wire in this one dumpster. Some dude was out there probably stripping some aluminum wire or something. That dude that was out there cleaning some aluminum, trying to get clean aluminum price, he might have been out there hitting up that same dumpster, but he wasn't, because he was out there cleaning something that wasn't worth his time to be cleaned. Not everything that you clean, it doesn't all have to be for financial reasons. Some people just like stripping wire, and that's cool. But if you're trying to do this for a full-time living, you gotta learn the things that are not worth it to clean. Another thing that I've seen people post about is these air conditioner condensers and stuff, like those copper aluminum coils. I was commenting a little bit with some dude on some other dude's video. He's like, oh, how do you quickly take the copper out of these copper aluminum coils? And I told him, you don't. Just take it to a place that pays better for the dirty ones with the steel still on them, and go out there and find more metal. And like, he can't grasp that concept, so I'm saving up some coils here, and I'm gonna do a video on them. And we're gonna do some math, and those are the one thing that I will legitimately say it's not worth your time cleaning them unless you have a hammer mill. If you have a hammer mill that can clean them, it is 100% worth your time, especially if you have the downstream sorting machines that you need to separate the steel from the copper from the aluminum. But if you're sitting there cutting the copper out of a copper aluminum AC coil, you're making less than $1 an hour. I've already had to prove that to some dude that was coming in to the scrapyard when I was running the small scale. He was spending like 3-4 hours a night ripping the copper out of these aluminum coils, and I pretty much took his bag of copper and his bag of aluminum, I threw it on the scale and ran it up as a clean copper aluminum coil, I wrote down the price. I threw his stuff down separately, and it was on his ticket. And I said, look at this price and look at the price of your copper and aluminum. Add them together and tell me if there's a reason for you to keep doing this. Because this is what we would pay you for the clean coils. This is what we paid you after all of your efforts. He looked at that paper and said, I'm never cleaning another one of these again. And you know, that goes back to what I was saying about, you know, be smarter than some of the other guys out there. You know, there's a lot of guys out there that have been breaking things down and cleaning them religiously, saying, oh, you get paid so much more for, you know, copper if you rip it out of this. And, you know, is it worth it? Maybe not. Maybe not. You know, I used to break down a lot of washing machines, rip the motors and wires out of them. You notice I don't do that anymore. I used to do a lot of microwaves. You'll notice I don't do them anymore. I did some math and I think I made like 30 cents tearing a microwave apart. Now, getting into that, there's other reasons, like I said, why somebody would break some stuff down. If you notice Adventures with Mike, or I don't even know if I have any pictures of it, but when I used to break down, when I used to live on Fort Hood, I would break down washing machines and stuff, break down dryers, just so I could cram it into the truck and be able to fit more metal. Because, you know, when I was on Fort Hood, I was active duty Army, and, you know, I didn't get to go to the scrapyard every day. I could go Thursdays after work sometimes, and then sometimes, you know, if they were open on the weekends, you know, I could go Saturday morning. But other than that, like, you know, I didn't have time. And then, you know, we were always in the field and stuff, so if we went to the field on a Saturday, that eliminates that day right there. So sometimes I was building loads up for like 2-3 weeks at a time when I lived on Fort Hood. So breaking down washing machines was not only for the wire and the motors, but also just to be able to cram more onto my truck. So, you know, learn the things that's worth it for you to take apart, and then learn what's not worth it for you to take apart. Alright, and the next thing is, you know, we've kind of touched on this a little bit before, but don't worry about the competition. You know, you are your biggest enemy out there. You know, I've told this story a few times by now, but, you know, when I was just starting out, probably in my first year of doing scrap metal, you know, there was probably like 7 or 8 other guys that you would see every night that you were out hitting up the same neighborhoods you were. And, you know, I never let that bother me, you know. Some people were out there looking for other things other than what I was. Some people were out there looking for the same stuff. But there was this one night, I saw some dude in a work van. He was out there getting scrap metal just like I was. You know, he saw me, he saw my truck, and, you know, I saw him and I saw what he was doing. And, you know, we were leapfrogging each other a little bit in the neighborhood. You know, like, I would stop to pick something up and he would go by me. And then he would find something and he would stop to pick it up. And then I would go by him. And then I'd be in front of him. So this dude, what he was trying to do is, you know, I had him shaking in his boots. You know, he's trying to do things very quick. You know, he's trying to get in front of me so he can see the stuff before I do. You know, so he can get to it before I get to it. And by doing so, you know, he was driving by a whole bunch of pretty valuable scrap just because he's blitzing through the neighborhood, only stopping for the big stuff. You know, whereas me, I didn't let his presence affect me. you know, I think he might have got like a symbol in a washing machine or something, and maybe something else. And then he left the neighborhood. And, you know, he was running through these streets doing 70, 80 miles an hour, blowing through stop signs. It's a residential neighborhood, and the speed limit was 25. You know, like, it's absolutely ridiculous. What I was doing is I was just doing my same old thing, you know. And, you know, I was stopping for everything. I saw a curtain rod, I would stop and pick it up. You know, I didn't let his presence affect me, and I ended up getting a full load of metal. Whereas, like I said, he only got a couple things because he let my presence affect him. And, you know, like I was saying earlier, you know, sometimes you see these other dudes that are doing something and you think, oh, I gotta do something the way they are because, you know, they're more experienced or whatever. And like I was saying, you know, don't fall into that trap. You know, be your own person. Do things your own way. You know, if doing what they do helps you out, then, you know, go for it. But if it doesn't, you know, don't do it that way. You know, just keep doing your own thing. Don't let anybody else sway the way you're doing things just because, you know, you think that, oh, I gotta compete with this guy. No, man, just the only person you need to compete with is yourself. You know. You know, I saw that other dude a few videos ago. You know, he was out there picking up things to resell and stuff. You know, he blew by so much stuff just because he saw me and got scared, I guess. I don't know, man. But even on the same road I was on, he blew by like 10 different things that he could have stopped and, you know, a reseller would probably want. You know, I ended up getting a few of those things and just threw them on the scrap truck. You know, but I wasn't out there looking for things to resell. So I don't know, man. Just, like I said, don't worry about the competition. Just keep doing what you do. Alright, so the next thing I have to say, which probably should have been the first thing I said, but my list is not in order. I just kind of wrote things down as I thought of them. So start with what you have and grow slowly when you can afford to do so. You might think, a lot of people think that, you know, because you get paid by weight for scrap metal, that having a bigger truck is the way to go. And, you know, that's not always the case. My first truck ever was in '98 Tacoma, and that was probably the best truck I could have ever had for doing scrap metal in the area that I'm originally from. You know, it was fuel efficient, and, you know, it could get into some really tight places because it was a regular cab Tacoma. Like, it was very maneuverable. A lot of people think that, you know, oh, you gotta go into so much debt to start scrap metal. You gotta get some big F-10,000, you know, and this, no, you don't. I see a lot of dudes with bicycles and trailers, lawnmowers and trailers. If that's all you got, you know, start with it, you know. It may not be the most successful vehicle in the long run, but it's going to get you started. You know, once you get started doing it, then you can figure out if it works for you, and if getting a bigger vehicle is going to be worth it, you know. You know, kind of keep in mind too that if all you have is a car or something, you know, you might need to you might need to get like some small little beat up pickup truck or something. Try not to spend too much. I mean, I get it. Like, you know, you might have to spend a little bit, but try not to go balls deep, get in that one Ram 5500 I showed you a few videos ago in the dump trailer that I have. if you've never even picked up more than 3 loads of scrap metal before, you know, like I said, grow if you can afford to. I mean, you might have to take a loan out on something, but it is what it is. But, don't think you need to go out and blow $90,000 on a new dump truck just to get started in scrap metal, because you don't. I know a lot of dudes that have been running the same used truck they bought in 1990, and they're still running that truck today doing scrap metal. You see the rig I have and you might get jealous of it, but you gotta realize that the rig I'm running I also bought for my welding and my tree service. So that kind of goes back to the previous thing I was saying about don't worry about your competition. You see me out here with the rig I have, you might think I'm some big scary factor, but at the end of the day, like I said, I'm doing this part-time, and I have to do it full-time hours during the winter sometimes, but I'm not doing it year-round, full-time. So don't worry about my rig. I'm not out there every day. There's still enough metal out there that you can go pick up metal in the same areas I'm in. Even if all you have is some small little Toyota. Alright, so the next thing you need to know to be successful in this business is you're going to get judged and you're going to get into weird situations. Deal with it. There's a lot of guys out there that, they think, this person's going to see me in a dumpster and, I'm going to feel so bad about it, and, they're afraid to even get in the dumpsters or pick up any trash or whatever. And, you're not going to be successful doing scrap metal if you have that mindset. One of my best friends in the Army was like that. If nobody saw him, he would go balls deep into the dumpster, but if somebody was seeing him, he wasn't going anywhere near it. Whereas I'm the opposite. Like, I don't give a shit if people see me doing this stuff. No, you're gonna get judged. Some people are gonna look at you and be like, man, that's gross or whatever, and at the end of the day, if you're not taking them back to your house, who gives a crap, I don't care with some stranger on the street in some city I don't even live in. I don't care what they think of me, So, it is what it is, But you're going to get yourself into some weird situations too. There's all sorts of, you see all sorts of stuff being a contractor, and, when you're doing the scrap metal stuff. Some people will see you and they'll start talking to you about, how their father used to do this for 30 years and this, that, and the other. And, like you just get into some really weird situations, and sometimes you just gotta listen to people's stories, and just be like, yeah, man, like be supportive of them or whatever. Or, I don't know. I've been in some really, really weird situations doing scrap metal, but at the end of the day, I'm still out here doing it. Those situations, I haven't let them affect me at all. I've even been arrested and held at gunpoint because some security guard, probably took a bunch of swirlies when he was in high school. Probably lived his life at the bottom of a toilet. He put me in a weird situation, but at the end of the day, I didn't let that affect me, and I just keep doing what I do, Alright, so the next piece of advice I have for you is you need to think logistically. There's a saying that amateurs talk tactics and experts talk logistics. In order to succeed in the scrap metal world, and I mean to like really succeed, you gotta have a logistical mindset. There's a lot of people, you know, we'll get into this later here in a bit too, but there's a lot of people that would drive three hours, well not 3 hours, but they'll drive way out of their way just to get 50 cents higher per 100 pounds for a light iron. And you know, sometimes that'll make sense, sometimes it doesn't. You'll notice at the end of this video, you know, I actually talk about that, you know, in real time, where I'm like, hey, you know, I have a yard that'll pay me $30 less per gross ton, which is 2,240 pounds. $30 less per 2,240 pounds. And I'm going to go take it to them because it's going to save me 2.5 hours of driving. And, you know, throughout the whole load, it might have paid me $50 to $70 more to take it to the other yard that pays me more. But logistically, you know, I'm going to have more than $70 in expenses. So, you know, if I can take it to a yard that's closer, get paid whatever they're going to pay me, I can go back out and get more metal. You know, so it was worth it to me to take it to the lesser paying yard. And, you know, you got to have a mindset like that, doing everything in scrap metal. You know, like, you know, the kind of truck that you buy, the kind of equipment you have, the time of day you're doing this, you know, like a lot of the hours you're going to work have to be like, you know, like a second shift or third shift if you're doing commercial stuff, maybe weekends, you know, unless you're getting like scheduled pickups, then it's just whenever people have stuff. But you know, you got to have that logistical mindset to come up with that sort of schedule and everything. You know, determine if it's worth it to take it to yard A that's going to pay you a whole bunch of money, or take it to yard B, not get a whole lot of money, but you have your truck opened up for doing other things. You know, World War II was won not because America was better tactically than the Germans. You know, the Germans, they had way better tanks than us. They had, you know, coming into France, you know, they had the better position. They outgunned us hands down. But America said, you know what? We're going to wait till they go on leave, and then we're going to hit them. You know, if we would have just tried to outgun them, that plan would have never worked. You know, history would not have worked the way it did. You know, the Germans had the Panzer tanks, which were probably the best tanks in the world, but they couldn't get food, fuel, or personnel to those tanks when they needed it the most, and America could. And you know, that's the only reason why World War II went the way it did. And you know, it's all because of logistics. You know, like, we might not have had the best fighting forces, but Eisenhower said, you know what, we're gonna get anybody that can drive a truck, and we're getting supplies up to the line. And, you know, it's kind of the mindset you need to have doing scrap metal and stuff. But yeah, anybody can gather up scrap metal. But, you know, coming up with the logistics behind how everything works is going to put you in a far better position than a lot of these other guys that have that tactical mindset. You know, these guys, like I said, these guys that are sitting there stripping these aluminum engine blocks for less than $1 an hour, you know, that's a tactical mindset. They're just focused on, you know, oh, I need to get more money for the metal I got. You know, they don't see the value in, you know, just taking less money for what they got and being able to get more, and, you know, being able to make a higher dollar per hour, I guess, if that makes any sense. Alright, and then the next thing I got for you, you know, is, I kind of touched on it a little bit with some of these other things, is you want to network with all the different yards in your area, even some of the ones that are outside your regular area. You know, keeping in mind that price per pound is not everything. You know, kind of going back to the logistics of it and everything. You know, you might have, where I lived, originally there was like 7 different yards all within 30 miles of each other. Some of them, I mean, they all kind of paid similar for like the ferrous stuff. But, you know, some of them paid slightly higher for different things. Like the first yard I worked at, they had a system where they were getting a lot of different steel rims, so they would pay more for steel rims than the other yards. So, you know, and then, like, a lot of people have been finding out here recently with the low-grade wire in the yard that I've gone to a lot lately, is they don't pay a whole lot compared to other yards. You know, there's a yard in Columbus that pays 65 cents a pound for low-grade wire, and the yard I take it to only pays 35 cents. You know, so there's, but the yard I go to pays way more for steel than any of the other yards in the area. Especially like short iron, like heavy steel that's short. They pay, I think it's like, I don't know, like $50-$60 a ton more than any of these other yards. I mean, they're fairly competitive with the white iron, it seems like, right now. Last year, though, they were paying $225 a ton for a light iron, whereas, you know, even some of the other bigger yards, they were only at like $160 to $170 per gross ton. But then again, you know, for low-grade wire, they're paying less than some of these other yards. So, you know, you might have to have different buyers for different things, and that's totally okay, you know. And then going back to what I was saying about the logistics, you know, we kind of touched on the tactics there with the prices, but now let's get into the logistics, right? So you can go to a yard and it's like a complete swamp, you know, and you blow tires all the time, you know, but they might be paying 50 cents a pound higher, or $50 or $5 per 100 more than, you know, the yard down the road. But the yard down the road, they might have a concrete pad that's kind of elevated with a drop off, and they keep that concrete pad very clean, you know. You know, it might make more sense to go to that yard even though they're paying less per pound, because you're not getting flat tires, you know. you might go to one yard and they have an hour-long wait to get on the scale, and then another 3-hour-long wait if you need a crane. You go to the yard down the road, they might not pay as much, but you're in and out of there in 5-10 minutes. So come up with a system for what stuff goes to what yard, or what sort of circumstances you have in your life at the time that you need to go to the yard may determine which yard you go to. And then if you're like me, where you're jumping different areas, like I could be in Columbus one day and then be up in Toledo the next. I want to have different yards. I don't want to have to run all the way to a central location to go take my stuff. If I'm in Columbus and it's 3 o'clock, I know, hey, I can get over to, there's like 5-6 different yards down in that area. I've gone to 3 of them. Some of them I like for different reasons. There's one I'll probably never go back to. But, not for any particular reason other than just the other yards I think are better. If I'm down there in that area, I don't want to have to run all the way back to the yard I normally go to. Because that could be like a 3-hour drive, which equates to, a 6-hour round trip. I want to be down there. I want to get that stuff off my truck and get moving. I don't want to deal with just one yard. I want to deal with them all. So that's my other piece of advice there. Alright, and then the next thing I want to say, we're going to close this out, but this should have been the very first thing I said, is, you want to be respectful, you want to be reliable, and you want to be trustworthy. There's a lot of shady people out there doing some scrap metal. You don't want to be one of them. You don't want to be associated with the shadiness. If you want to be successful, you want to network yourself and be somebody that can be trusted with going into some really expensive building or a really expensive yard or something, being trusted to be there alone and only pick up the stuff that you're there to pick up. Nobody wants to. If you go there and your mindset is to steal everything and just be some shady ass motherfucker, people aren't going to want to call you to pick up their scrap. They're going to go find somebody else. And this goes with pickups. It goes for the e-scrap people. It goes for, people dumpster diving and stuff. When you go dumpster diving, there's a real fine line between, being kicked out of a dumpster and, being able to have permission to be in there. And then sometimes people will even give you more while you're there, But the difference maker there is you need to be trustworthy, respectful, and, if somebody says, oh, hey, I got this other thing, it's a Friday, we won't have this other thing ready till Monday, can you pick it up? If you show up on Monday and pick that thing up, they're going to be like, cool. They might even call you back again. Whereas, if they're like, hey, we got this thing, it's going to be ready on Monday at 3 o'clock, you call them up at Monday at 5 o'clock and tell them, hey man, I'm not going to make it. They're probably going to say, hey, that's cool, we'll find somebody else. So if you really want to be successful, you got to be that guy that shows up. The scrap metal world, I kind of like it because it's, either you're there or you lose it. They give it to somebody else. It puts a lot of pressure on you. There's some jobs you can do, like these contractors that are working on the roads down the road here. They'll take 6-7 months to do a job that another contractor can do in 3 weeks. With the scrap metal, it's not like that, Either you're there and you do it, or they find somebody else. And I kind of like that, kind of puts the pressure on you. So, I don't want to ramble on too much about this, but, be reliable, be respectful, and be trustworthy. Even if you're getting kicked out of the dumpster, just be respectful, Like, don't make a big scene about it. Be respectful, and, at the end of the day, move on. There's other dumpsters out there. If you're respectful, chances are that the person that kicked you out of the dumpster ain't gonna say nothing to nobody besides you. If you're being a dickhead when you get kicked out, that dude might tell 20 of his friends that all have dumpsters or whatever, and then you're not allowed at 20 other places because you were a dickhead to one guy. So just be respectful out there, I could ramble on about this for another hour, but I'm not going to. If you liked this kind of video, let me know in the comments. Maybe if you got some criticisms of it, or if you got something else to add too. You can leave that down in the comments as well. This is the first video I've made like this. I kind of talked for a lot longer than I thought I was going to. But, I'm trying to convey 15 years of experience into a video that can be seen and interpreted by people doing all sorts of different scrap metal activities, Like, it's kind of geared towards dumpster diving and curbside shopping, but at the same time, you can apply this knowledge to e-scrap, scheduled pickups type scrap metal collecting, Facebook Marketplace, reselling crap, whatever scrap metal activities you're into. A lot of this knowledge can kind of apply to that. So I was trying to make a video that's kind of more general. I'm going to kind of try to make some more scrap metal advice videos to kind of narrow down the focus a little bit. So, if you're into this kind of thing, leave a comment down below. Your support helps me stay motivated to make more videos. So, I'm probably going to stop talking here, and it's going to be another probably hour, a little bit less than an hour. We'll just do some ASMR stuff, I'm not going to talk, you're just going to hear the sounds of some scrap metal pickups. If you've watched my videos, I do appreciate you. If you've left comments, I appreciate that as well, even the negative ones. Thank you. I'll see you. cut the cord on that, but left me the whole unit. What the heck? Man, running out of room here. This is absurd. I don't know if I can get my truck over here. Yeah, I'll take some.
Is that 20 inches? The tires any good on it?
What was that?
A 20-inch bicycle? The tires any good on it?
I don't know which one you're talking about,
The green
man.
one right here.
I have no clue, honestly.
Yeah, I need new tires for his bike, but I was like, oh, I'll stop and ask this guy real quick.
Alright.
I don't know if they're any good or not. got you a fucking load, don't you?
Yeah.
This right here, this is a 16.
This one?
No, the one right below.
This one?
Yep, that one.
I know they ain't got no air in them.
Yeah, it's the tires. Tires look good, don't they? I ain't worried about the inner tubes, just the tires.
Maybe that.
You want to sell it? The bike?
I don't know if I can get it off.
If I can get her off and sell to me?
Well,
That one, that bike right here.
alright. Yeah, I thought I had that part tied down. Hold on.
There we go.
Almost. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got it.
What you want for it, buddy?
Like $5.
Alright, let's see, high five them.
Alright.
Yeah, sure do.
Alright.
There you go, boss. Thank
Yeah.
you, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
need it for tires.
Alright.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's go, boss.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, so I might have to call it on this one. Kind of really running out of room. I mean, I might pick up a few more things along the way, but I'm going to the scrapyard now. Got a bunch of heavy iron in here. I got an air conditioner, some aluminum, copper, and some other stuff. Up here, it's a gigantic mess of light iron and stuff, or shred, or whatever you want to call it. There's some heavy iron in here, like the sprinkler pipe, but it'll go through the shredder, so I'm not worried about it. I could get more if I wanted to pull it out, but I'm not pulling all that stuff out just for an extra 30 cents. Yeah, this is quite the mess. I would like to get more while I'm down here, but it's getting pretty unsafe to haul this thing. It's getting really hard to keep stacking things higher and higher. There's not really a very good way to tie stuff down on this trailer. That is the one thing that does suck. Once you get above your sides, kind of gets kind of unsafe. I mean, you can do it. I've done it before. I mean, I'm doing it now, but it's hard to find tie down spots. I actually had to get this tire plugged. I think you can see the plug right here. So that was $20 there on that one. Kind of ran over a screw or something. But yeah, we got quite the load here. I'm gonna go get it dumped. I'm gonna have to get $30 less than I normally do. Go into a different yard, but it'll save me about 2.5 hours of drive time, so I'm willing to take that $30 loss. I gotta get this trailer opened up, and we're gonna go pick up more today. It's actually only 1:30, so the day is still young. I'll see you guys later.